The research vessel Gentle Whisper was dying. Its engines had failed 3 hours ago, and now the ship drifted through the cold darkness of the nebula like a wounded animal waiting for predators to find it. The lights on the bridge flickered every few seconds, and the air was growing thin. Commander Ani stood at her station with her 4 slender arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Her translucent blue skin showed the rapid pulse of her twin hearts beneath. She was afraid. Around her, 42 others worked desperately to restore power to the failing systems. They were scientists, not warriors. Their species had evolved on a gentle world with calm seas and soft winds. They had never needed to fight. They had never needed to run. The universe had always been kind to them until today. Ani turned to her communications officer. "Send the distress signal again. Send it on every frequency we have." The young officer nodded and transmitted their desperate plea into the void. The message was simple. They were stranded. They were dying. They needed help. Please, if anyone could hear them, please come. What Ani did not know was that 7 ships were already on their way, but they were not coming to help. They had detected the Gentle Whisper 2 days ago. They were hunters, predators who roamed the empty spaces between stars looking for prey. Their black ships were covered in spines and weapons, and their bodies were built for killing. They stood twice as tall as with armored skin and natural blades growing from their arms. They had hunted intelligent species for thousands of years. It was their culture. It was their religion. It was their joy. The pack leader watched the helpless ship on his screen and felt excitement building in his chest. 43 soft creatures with no weapons and no defenses. This would be a good hunt. He ordered his ships to spread out and surround the prey. There would be no escape. 16 hours away, the USS Valor was conducting routine patrol near the edge of human space. The ship was a destroyer-class warship, angular and covered in weapons that gleamed under the distant starlight. 200 humans served aboard her, and every single one of them had been trained for combat. This was not because humans loved war. It was because they had learned long ago that the universe did not care about peace. Communications officer Morgan was drinking her 3rd cup of coffee when the distress signal came through. She was a young woman with red hair and freckles across her nose. She had joined the Navy to see the stars, and so far she had seen mostly empty space and filing reports. But when the alien transmission filled her headset, she knew immediately that this was different. She ran the signal through the translation software and her blood went cold. Someone was dying out there. Someone was begging for help. Forwarded the message to the bridge. Captain Jake was in his ready room reviewing supply reports when the call came. He was 53 years old with gray at his temples and scars on his hands from a lifetime of hard work. He had grown up poor in a rough neighborhood and had fought his way into the academy through sheer determination. He had seen combat on 3 continents before he ever set foot on a starship. He understood suffering. He understood fear. And he understood that when someone called for help, you answered. He listened to the translation twice and then walked onto the bridge. "What do we know about this signal?" he asked. Pulled up the data on the main screen. "Sir, it is coming from the nebula, uncharted territory. The species calls themselves. They are a research vessel with 43 crew members. Their engines are dead and their life support is failing. They say they have maybe 10 hours left." Lieutenant Commander Carter looked up from the tactical station. He was a tall man with dark skin and careful eyes. He had served with Jake for 6 years and he knew what the captain was thinking. "Sir, the nebula is 16 hours from our position. Even at maximum speed, we would arrive after they are dead, and we have no information about what else might be in that region." Jake nodded slowly. "Push the engines, get us there in 14 hours. Opened his mouth to protest but stopped himself. He had seen that look in Jake's eyes before. The captain had made his decision. The Valor changed course and jumped to faster-than-light speed. What the humans did not know was that the Galactic Council had received the same distress signal. The Council was an alliance of over 100 species that governed most of known space. They had laws and treaties and diplomatic protocols for every situation. They had debated the situation for 3 hours in an emergency session. They were too dangerous, they concluded. The nebula was too far from Council territory. A rescue mission would require military vessels, and the Council did not want to risk a war with the hunters. They would simply have to accept their fate. It was tragic but unavoidable. The Council sent no ships. They filed the report and moved on to other business. No one thought to inform the humans. The young species from the violent planet at the edge of the galaxy was not even a full member of the Council. They were considered primitive and aggressive, useful only as hired security for wealthy merchants. The idea that humans would attempt a rescue mission on their own never occurred to anyone. On the Gentle Whisper, Ani watched her crew slowly losing hope. The temperature was dropping, and several of her people had already fallen unconscious from the thin air. She had sent the distress signal over 100 times and received no response. The universe was vast and empty, and no one was coming to save them. She did not know that they were only 4 hours away. She did not know that the humans were pushing their engines beyond safe limits to reach her. She only knew that her people were dying, and there was nothing she could do. Ani closed her large dark eyes and whispered a prayer to the old gods of her. Please, she begged silently, send someone to help us. Anyone. We do not want to die alone in the dark. 14 hours away, Jake stood on the bridge of the Valor and watched the stars streak past his windows. He did not know their culture or their history or their beliefs, but he knew they were afraid and alone, and that was enough. He would reach them in time. He had to. The Valor dropped out of hyperspace and the bridge crew saw hell waiting for them. The Gentle Whisper was surrounded by 7 black ships covered in spines and weapons. The vessel was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen holes in its hull, and its lights were barely flickering. Small figures in spacesuits floated near some of the breaches, either dead or dying. The hunters had arrived 2 hours before the humans, and they had been taking their time with their prey. Morgan felt her stomach turn as she watched the scene. Captain, I am detecting life signs on the ship. 31 survivors, but they are jamming their communications. They could not call for help even if they wanted to. Jake stood perfectly still at the center of the bridge. His face showed no emotion, but his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He had seen cruelty before. He had seen what beings could do to each other when they believed they had power. It never got easier to witness. Open a channel to those ships, he said quietly. Carter worked his console. Channel open, sir. Jake spoke in a clear, steady voice. Unknown vessels, this is Captain Jake of the USS Valor. Stand down and withdraw immediately. The ship under attack is now under our protection. You have 60 seconds to comply. For a long moment there was only silence. Then the channel crackled with a harsh grating sound that the translation software identified as laughter. The pack leader appeared on the main screen. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall with dark armored plates covering his body. His eyes were small and red and filled with cruel amusement. Blades extended from his forearms, still wet with something that might have been blood. Little soft creatures, they said, you come to our hunting ground and make demands. We have killed thousands of species stronger than you. Your ship is small. Your bodies are weak. Turn around and flee while you still can. This prey belongs to us. Jake did not respond immediately. He turned to his chief medical officer. Lisa, what do your scans tell us about them? Lisa was studying her console with intense focus. She was a small woman with gray-streaked hair and glasses that she refused to replace with corrective surgery. She had been a combat medic before she became a doctor, and she knew how to read an enemy. They are big and strong, she said. Natural armor, natural weapons, but sir, look at their data. They evolved on a garden planet. Low gravity, stable temperature, no major predators. They have never had to struggle for survival. They became hunters because they wanted to, not because they had to. She looked up at the captain with a thin smile. "We evolved on Earth." Jake nodded slowly. Everyone on the bridge understood what that meant. Earth was not a gentle world. Earth was a planet of earthquakes and volcanoes and hurricanes. It was a world where the temperature could swing from burning hot to freezing cold in a single day. The gravity was high, the atmosphere was thick with oxygen that could fuel fires, and every ecosystem was filled with predators trying to eat you. Humans had not conquered their world. They had survived it. The pack leader was still waiting for a response. He had scanned the human vessel and found a crew of soft pink creatures with fragile bones and thin skin. They had no natural armor. They had no claws or fangs. By every measure he knew they should be easy prey. He could not see what was hidden beneath that soft exterior. He could not see the muscles that had evolved to function under crushing gravity. He could not see the immune systems that had learned to fight off a million different diseases. He could not see the hearts that could pump blood for hours during extreme exertion, or the minds that had learned to plan and adapt and never ever give up. He could not see that humans were the most dangerous thing the universe had ever produced. "Your 60 seconds are up," Jake said calmly. "You should have run." On the gentle whisper, Commander Ani watched through a cracked viewport as the strange, angular ship began to move. She had never seen a vessel like it before. It was ugly by standards, all hard edges and weapons platforms. But there was something about the way it moved that made her hearts beat faster. The human ship was not retreating. It was not trying to negotiate. It was accelerating directly toward the formation. The pack leader screamed orders to his hunters. All 7 ships opened fire at once, launching missiles and energy beams at the approaching vessel. It was enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. The human ship did not slow down. Carter had calculated the incoming trajectories before they had even finished targeting. The Valor's point defense systems came online and filled the space around the ship with a wall of metal and light. Missiles exploded harmlessly. Energy beams scattered against defensive screens. Not a single shot reached the hull. Engineering Chief Brooks was pushing the engines harder than they were designed to go. The ship was pulling acceleration that would have crushed most species into paste. The crew felt the pressure pushing them into their seats, but they had trained for this. They had evolved for this. Their bodies complained but did not fail. The Valor swept through the formation like a shark through a school of fish. It was faster than anything the hunters had ever seen. It moved with a precision that their targeting systems could not match. And when it opened fire, the results were devastating. Human weapons were not elegant. They were brutal and efficient, designed by a species that had spent its entire existence fighting wars. Kinetic rounds punched through armor like it was paper. Missiles tore ships apart from the inside. Energy weapons burned through hulls in seconds. The pack leader watched in disbelief as 3 of his ships exploded in the first exchange. He had never encountered anything like this. These soft creatures were supposed to be prey. They were supposed to be afraid. Instead, they were destroying his pack with cold, mechanical precision. He ordered a retreat, but it was too late. The human ship was already coming around for another pass. On the bridge of the Valor, Weapons Officer Amy worked her console with quiet focus. She was a small woman who had grown up in a quiet suburb and had learned to play violin as a child. She spoke softly and smiled often, and her sometimes forgot what she did for a living. But when she had targets in her sights, she became something else entirely. She tracked the fleeing ships and fired without hesitation. 2 more exploded. A 6th tried to hide behind an asteroid and she put a missile through its engine core. The 7th and final ship, the pack leader's vessel, turned to ram the Valor in a desperate last attack. Amy put 3 rounds through its reactor. The ship came apart in a silent bloom of fire and debris. The battle had lasted 11 minutes. Jake watched the wreckage drift through space and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Then he turned to his crew. "Begin rescue operations. Get those people off that ship." The Valor moved toward the damaged Gentle Whisper, and for the first time in hours, the survivors saw something other than death approaching them. They had a word for planets like Earth. They called them. These were places where the environment itself seemed designed to kill anything that tried to live there. High gravity that crushed bones, extreme temperatures that froze or burned flesh, predators at every level of the food chain, diseases that evolved faster than medicine could cure them. Natural disasters that could wipe out entire populations in hours. Most intelligent species in the galaxy had evolved on gentle worlds. They had developed in stable environments where food was plentiful and threats were few. They had grown smart because they had time to think, time to build, time to create civilizations without constantly fighting for survival. Humans had none of those advantages. They had evolved on a world that wanted them dead. Commander Ani did not understand this yet as she watched the human ship approach her crippled vessel. She only knew that these strange creatures had appeared from nowhere and destroyed 7 hunters in less time than it took her to drink a cup of water. She did not know if she should feel grateful or terrified. The airlock of the Gentle Whisper groaned as the human boarding shuttle attached itself to the hull. Ani gathered her surviving crew in the main corridor and waited. Some of her people were injured and others were barely conscious from the thin air. They had been certain they were going to die. Now they were not sure what was going to happen. The airlock opened and the humans came through. Ani had studied many species during her career as a researcher, but nothing had prepared her for this. The humans were shorter than but they moved with a confidence that made them seem larger. They wore armored suits that covered their bodies completely and carried weapons that looked heavy enough to crush an arm. But what struck Ani most was how they walked. They did not hesitate. They did not look around nervously. They moved through the damaged ship like they owned it, like the cold and the thin air and the jagged metal meant nothing to them. The lead human removed her helmet, and Ani saw a female with pale skin and brown hair cut short. Her eyes were a strange green color, and they swept across the survivors with quick efficiency. "I am Lieutenant Commander," the human said through a translation device. "We are here to help. Is anyone critically injured?" Ani tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She had spent the last 6 hours believing she was going to die. The sudden shift from despair to hope was too much for her system to process. Her legs gave out and she began to fall. Caught her before she hit the ground. The human's grip was firm, but gentle, and Ani found herself looking up into those strange green eyes. "It is okay," said softly. "You are safe now, we have got you." More humans spread through the ship, moving with practiced coordination. They set up portable heaters to warm the freezing corridors. They deployed emergency oxygen generators to restore breathable air. They found the wounded and began treating them with medical supplies from their packs. Corpsman Daniel Hayes was one of the first to reach the cargo bay where most of the survivors had gathered. He was a young man with blonde hair and kind eyes who had joined the Navy because he wanted to help people. What he found in that bay nearly broke his heart. They were huddled together for warmth, their thin bodies shaking and their large dark eyes filled with fear. Many of them had injuries from the attack, cuts and burns that had gone untreated for hours. A few were not moving at all. Daniel dropped to his knees beside the nearest injured and opened his medical kit. The alien flinched away from him, clearly terrified, but Daniel kept his movements slow and his voice soft. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, knowing the translation device would carry his words. "I am a healer. Let me help." There was young, probably the equivalent of a teenager by their species standards. She had a deep cut across her shoulder that was bleeding slowly. Daniel cleaned the wound and applied a synthetic skin patch that would seal it until proper surgery could be performed. The whole time he talked to her, telling her about Earth and his home and his family, anything to keep her calm. When he finished, the young looked at him with something like wonder. "You came to help us," she whispered. "Why, you do not know us." Daniel smiled. That does not matter, someone needed help, we came. Across the ship, similar scenes were playing out. Humans knelt beside wounded, shared their water and food, gave up their own thermal blankets to keep the aliens warm. They worked for hours without rest, stabilizing the injured and preparing them for transport to the Valor. One scientist was in critical condition, his lungs damaged by exposure to vacuum during the attack. He could not breathe on his own, and they did not have the equipment to help him. Daniel assessed the situation and made a decision. He pulled out his combat knife and cut open the alien's chest. The other screamed in horror, but Daniel ignored them. He had performed emergency surgery in worse conditions during his training. He found the damaged tissue, sealed it with a medical laser, and inserted a tube from his water recycler to help the alien breathe. It was crude and desperate, and it should not have worked. But the started breathing again. Found Commander Ani sitting alone in what remained of the bridge, staring at the dead screens. The commander looked up as the human approached. "I do not understand," Ani said quietly. "The Galactic Council received our distress signal. They had ships closer than yours. They chose not to come. They decided we were not worth saving." Sat down beside her. "I cannot speak for the Council. I can only tell you why we came." "Please tell me." Was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about our history, about the wars we fought and the disasters we survived. Humans have suffered a lot over the centuries. We have done terrible things to each other, and we have had terrible things done to us. But through all of it, there were always people who chose to help. People who ran toward danger instead of away from it. People who gave up their own safety to protect strangers." She looked at Ani with those steady green eyes. "We believe that is what makes us human, not our bodies or our technology, our choice to help when we could walk away." Ani felt tears forming in her large dark eyes. "Your species is very strange." Laughed softly. "We know, we get that a lot." 2 hours later, all 31 survivors had been transferred to the Valor. The human medical bay was working beyond capacity, treating injuries that human doctors had never seen before. But they adapted, they learned, and they refused to let anyone die. Captain Jake came to check on the refugees personally. He walked through the medical bay, stopping to speak with each, offering words of comfort through his translation device. When he reached Commander Ani, she grasped his hand with all 4 of her arms. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my people." Jake shook his head. "We did what anyone should do. I am sorry we could not get here sooner." Ani looked at this strange creature from the violent planet at the edge of the galaxy and realized that she had been wrong about many things. The universe was not empty and uncaring. It had sent her the most unlikely saviors imaginable. It had sent who chose to be kind. The journey back to human space took 3 days. During that time, the crew of the Valor learned more about their guests than any diplomatic mission could have taught them. There were scientists and explorers. They had traveled to the nebula to study a rare type of stellar phenomenon that only occurred in that region. Their species had been part of the Galactic Council for over 2,000 years, and in all that time they had never experienced violence firsthand. They had heard about them, of course. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the hunters, but they had always believed they were safe. They had believed the Council would protect them. They had been wrong. Commander Ani spent most of the journey on the bridge of the Valor, watching the human crew work. She was fascinated by everything she saw. The way they communicated with quick gestures and half-finished sentences that somehow conveyed complete ideas. The way they touched each other casually, a pat on the shoulder here, a brief embrace there. The way they laughed and argued and complained about the food but never stopped working. Jake found her there on the 2nd day, staring at the main with her large dark eyes. "You should be resting," he said gently. "Your people need you healthy." Ani turned to look at him. "I cannot rest. Every time I close my eyes, I see the ship surrounding us. I hear my crew screaming." She paused. And then I see your ship arriving. I watch the battle over and over in my mind, and I cannot understand what I am seeing." Jake nodded slowly. He had seen this before in survivors of violence. The mind struggled to process trauma by replaying it endlessly. "What is it that you cannot understand?" "You should not have won." Ani's voice was quiet but intense. "I have studied military theory. I know the mathematics of combat. 7 ships against 1 with larger weapons and heavier armor. The odds were impossible, but you destroyed them in minutes. I need to understand how." Jake was silent for a long moment. Then he gestured for her to follow him. He led her through the ship to a section she had not seen before. It was a large open room filled with equipment that she did not recognize. Humans were moving through the space, lifting heavy objects, running on machines that went nowhere, fighting each other with padded weapons. "This is our training facility," Jake explained. "We call it the gym. Every human on this ship spends at least 2 hours here every day." Ani watched a female human lift a metal bar loaded with heavy weights. The bar would have crushed a flat. The human raised it above her head repeatedly, her face showing effort but no distress. "Your gravity is higher than ours," Ani said slowly, beginning to understand. "Your muscles are stronger." "That is part of it." Jake led her to another area where humans were practicing hand-to-hand combat. They moved with brutal efficiency, throwing each other to the ground and applying joint locks that would have snapped bones like twigs. But strength is not the main thing. The main thing is that we never stop fighting. He turned to face her directly. "Our world tried to kill us for 200,000 years. Earthquakes destroyed our cities. Diseases wiped out our populations. Predators hunted us in the night, and we survived all of it. Not because we were the strongest or the fastest we survived because we refused to give up. When something knocked us down, we got back up. When we lost a battle, we learned from it and came back stronger." He pointed to a young man practicing with a fighting knife. That boy grew up in a city where violence was common. He learned to fight before he learned to read. Now he uses those skills to protect people who cannot protect themselves. And the Lani asked, "They are predators who have never been challenged. They hunt species that run away. They have never fought anything that fights back." Jake's expression hardened. "We fight back, always." That evening, Ani joined the human crew for their communal meal. It was strange and uncomfortable at first. The food was bizarre, full of strong flavors that made her tongue tingle. The conversation was loud and fast, and filled with references she did not understand. But the humans made space for her at their table. They offered her dishes to try and laughed kindly when she made faces at the tastes. They asked about her world and her family and her work. Lisa, the ship's doctor, sat beside her and explained human physiology in simple terms. Ani learned that humans could survive injuries that would kill most species. They could lose limbs and continue fighting. They could go days without sleep and still function. They could heal from wounds that should have been fatal. "We are not invincible," Lisa said carefully. "We die just like anyone else, but we are very, very hard to kill." Carter joined them later and talked about human history. He told her about the wars they had fought against each other, millions dead over resources and territory and ideas. Ani was horrified at first, but explained that those dark chapters had taught humanity important lessons. "We learned what happens when we let hate and fear control us," he said. "We learned that the only way to truly survive is to work together. That is why we came to save you. Because we know what it is like to be alone and afraid, and we swore that we would never let anyone else feel that way if we could help it." On the third day, the Valor reached the edge of human space and made contact with authorities. The news of the rescue had already spread. Ships from a dozen species were waiting to escort the survivors home. But something had changed in the galaxy. Word of what the humans had done was traveling faster than any ship could fly. A single destroyer had the N1, a species that the Council had dismissed as primitive savages had done what no one else would do. They had answered a call for help. Commander Ani stood on the bridge of the Valor for the last time, preparing to transfer to a medical ship that would take her home. Jake stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. "I do not know how to thank you," Ani said. "You saved my life, you saved everyone." Jake shook his head. "You do not need to thank us, just remember what happened here, and maybe next time someone calls for help, you will answer too." Ani reached out and touched his hand with her slender fingers. Human skin was warm, she noticed, warmer than her own. "I will remember. I will make sure everyone remembers." She walked to the airlock where was waiting to escort her to the transfer shuttle. The human woman smiled at her. "Take care of yourself, Commander." Ani stopped and turned back. "Why did you really come? Your captain gave me the philosophical answer, but you were there on my ship. You held me when I fell. Why?" Was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, "Because it was the right thing to do, and because if our positions were reversed, I would want someone to come for me." Ani nodded slowly. It was such a simple answer, and yet it contained everything she needed to know about humanity. She stepped through the airlock and did not look back, but she carried the memory of those strange, fierce, kind creatures with her for the rest of her life. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 12 days after the rescue. Representatives from over 100 species gathered in the Great Chamber on the Council, a massive dome of crystalline material that had stood for 10,000 years. They came to discuss what they called the human problem. Admiral Chris Palmer received the summons on a Tuesday morning. He was 61 years old with white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had spent his entire adult life in the Navy, rising from a common sailor to command of the entire human fleet. He had fought pirates and smugglers and hostile aliens. He had lost friends and made hard choices, and carried the weight of responsibility for millions of lives. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for politics. He flew to the council chamber in his dress uniform, alone except for a single aide who carried translation equipment. The other admirals had wanted to send a fleet to show strength, but Chris had refused. He would face the galaxy on his own terms. The chamber was already full when he arrived. Hundreds of alien faces turned to watch him enter, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. He walked down the central aisle toward the speaking platform, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The council speaker was a tall being with silver skin and no visible eyes. She called the session to order and began listing the charges against humanity. Unauthorized military action in council space, destruction of vessels without provocation, interference in the natural order of the galaxy. The list went on for nearly an hour. When she finished, she turned to Admiral Palmer. "The human delegation may respond." Chris stepped forward and looked out at the assembled aliens. He thought about his grandmother, who had survived horrors during a war on Earth and had taught him that courage meant standing up even when you were afraid. He thought about his father, who had run into a burning building to save strangers and had died a hero. He thought about every human who had ever faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. "I will keep this brief," he said. "You are angry because we saved 43 people from being murdered. You want us to apologize for that. You want us to promise never to do it again." He paused and let the silence stretch. "No." The chamber erupted in outraged noise. Aliens shouted and gestured and demanded that the human be removed. The speaker called for order, but it took several minutes to restore calm. Chris waited patiently until he could speak again. "You received the same distress signal we did. You had ships closer to than ours. You chose to do nothing. You let those people die because you were afraid of the—" He pointed at the assembled representatives. "We are not afraid. We grew up on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We fought predators and diseases and natural disasters. We fought each other. And through all of that, we learned one lesson that apparently the rest of you have forgotten." His voice hardened. "When someone asks for help, you answer." The representative rose from his seat. He was massive, even larger than the pack leader who had died at the Valor's guns. His voice was a deep growl that the translation equipment struggled to process. "You killed 7 of our hunters," they said. "Our traditions demand blood payment. We will have satisfaction." Chris turned to face him directly. "Your hunters attacked an unarmed ship full of scientists. They were going to kill those people for sport. We stopped them. If you want to call that an act of war, go ahead, but I should warn you about something." He smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Earth has been at war with something for our entire existence. We are very, very good at it." The chamber fell silent. Even the seemed uncertain how to respond. This small, soft creature was threatening an empire of hunters without any trace of fear. The speaker intervened before the situation could escalate. "Admiral Palmer, the Council is prepared to offer humanity certain benefits in exchange for an agreement to limit your military activities. You would be granted full membership and access to Council technology and trade networks. All you must do is accept our authority." Chris shook his head slowly. "You are offering us a place at your table if we promise to let innocent people die. That is not a deal we will ever accept." He turned and began walking toward the exit. "The human fleet will continue to answer distress calls. We will continue to protect those who cannot protect themselves. If the Council has a problem with that, you know where to find us." He was almost at the door when a new voice called out. It was soft and musical and immediately recognizable. Commander Ani stood in the visitors' gallery, her 4 arms raised for attention. "The delegation wishes to speak." The speaker hesitated, but protocol required her to grant the request. Ani walked down to the speaking platform and faced the council. 12 days ago, I was certain I was going to die. My ship was crippled and surrounded by predators. I sent a distress signal to everyone who could hear it, and the Council, the organization that has protected my people for 2,000 years, decided I was not worth saving." Her voice trembled with emotion. "Then the humans came. They did not know us. They had no treaties with us, no obligations to us. But they came anyway because that is who they are. They fought for us. They bled for us. They saved my people when no one else would." She turned to look at Admiral Palmer. "The will remember this, and we will not stand silent while the Council punishes humanity for an act of courage." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Other delegations began to stir. The rescue had touched something in the galaxy, a memory of older values that had been buried under centuries of politics and fear. Admiral Palmer looked at the commander and nodded once in gratitude. Then he left the chamber. His shuttle was barely clear of the Council station when his communicator buzzed. 3 more distress signals had been detected at the edge of known space. Species that had never spoken to humans were calling for help. They had heard about the Valor. They had heard that there was a species out there that still cared. Chris Palmer authorized the deployment of the 3rd Fleet. Back on the Valor, now undergoing repairs at a human station, Morgan received a message from Commander Ani. The scientist had returned home and was working to build support for humanity among the Council's member species. She wanted to learn more about humans, to understand what made them so different from everyone else. Thought about the question for a long time. She thought about Earth and its violence and its beauty. She thought about human history with all its darkness and all its light. She thought about her who had risked their lives for strangers without hesitation. Finally, she typed her response. "We grew up in hell. It taught us that the only way to survive was together. And once we learned that lesson, we decided that everyone deserved the same chance we had. We did not want anyone else to feel alone the way we once did. So when someone calls for help, we answer. Every time. No matter what." She sent the message and returned to her station. The repairs would be finished soon and the Valor would return to service. There were more people out there who needed help, more calls that needed answering. Somewhere in the depths of space, a ship was in trouble. Its crew was sending out a desperate signal, hopping against hope that someone would hear them. The fleet was already on its way. And so it would always be, because that was what humans did. They ran toward danger. They fought for strangers. They refused to let anyone die alone if they could help it. The galaxy had spent centuries believing that kindness was weakness, that compassion was foolishness, that the only way to survive was to look out for yourself. Humanity was here to prove them wrong. One rescue at a time,